So my name's Tim Decker. I'm a lead Maltster and social media manager here at Admiral Maltings in Alameda, California. We source all of our grain, so barley, wheat, rye, and oats from small family farms in California. When we receive grain from our farmers, they arrive in a truck. We have our red conveyor system here where we take it out with the forklift and the truck rolls over and the bottom of the truck opens up and spills the grain onto the conveyor. The mouth of the conveyor goes into the bucket elevator that's between the two silos. We're receiving this grain in the, let's say, 7% moisture by weight. We separate our Butter 12 conventional into one silo and our Copeland into the other, and that makes up most of what we do. And if we're receiving something else, we do it in the super sack. Once inside the silo, it'll usually get used up within a week and a half. We're running, I think last year we did 172 batches, ranging between 8 tons and 10 tons each batch. So we're moving quite a bit of barley, but in the big scheme, the big picture, we're really just a drop in the bucket for malt production globally or even in North America. With that said, we make our malt in a very traditional way. It's floor malted, which was the standard for malting basically from the 13th to the 17th century. We do use a couple of modern tools to make sure that we're making the best quality malt. But the reason why we use this very old method of floor malting is similar to a lager or a saison that you might do an open primary fermentation to really get the best yeast expression and to not stress out your yeast in that vital period of primary fermentation. There's a microbiome on the surface of the barley or any of the other grains. There's a microbiome that comes from the farm. It also is affected by the microbiome in our building and in our steep water. That microbiome, we think, is going to create the best flavor compounds and flavor precursors by letting it breathe and sit out in kind of a more open, shallow bed instead of a very deep bed. Modern malting techniques would put the grain in a much deeper bed and force air through the bottom to try to make sure that it's getting all the oxygen that we're giving it, but it's an artificial way of receiving that oxygen. When we floor malt, we're letting it go in about a 3-inch thick bed, quite wide, you'll see when we get inside. And twice a day we're turning that malt, so we're giving it uniform access to oxygen, moisture, and temperature. The grain is starting to heat up when it's on the floor during the germination phase after the steep tank, and we'll go through all the steps in just a minute. So while it's heating up on the floor, our floor is actually cooled by glycol lines. We have miles of glycol line in the floor. In the old days, you wouldn't have this. So for us, because we can't cool the room itself, it's such a giant room, the next best way to monitor or to maintain the temperature that we like for our floor malt is to cool the floor. A lot of people assume we're heating the floor. It's the other way around. The malt will heat itself just fine, and we're trying to taper that down to around 65 degrees Fahrenheit, and that's what's going to slowly break down the protein inside the grain. So malting is required to access sugars that are inside grain so that you can ferment those sugars into alcohol and CO2 to create beer. If you're making wine, you just have to crush the grape. The yeast on the outside is going to eat the sugars on the inside and immediately start fermentation. With honey, you would just have to water it down so that the viscosity is less, and it's going to immediately start fermenting with the yeast that's in the honey and make mead. Cider, you're just crushing apples and again exposing yeast to the sweet juice inside. Malt is a different thing where we have to trick Mother Nature into thinking that we've planted the seed in the ground. A seed doesn't have any way of gathering nutrients early in its life until it gets its rootlet grown. So the starch inside the seed has to be broken down into simple sugars. Starch is just a long, complex sugar. By making it into simple sugars, yeast can then eat those sugars to create the fermentation. But if you were to just take raw grain right from the farm and put it into your mash tun, like our brewer friends next door at Alameda, nothing would happen. There is a protective protein layer and what's called beta-glucans that need to be broken down. and we need to be able to have moisture go through the entire kernel. If you've ever cooked a grain of rice and it's undercooked and you rub it in your fingers and you get that little gritty pearl in the middle, that is kind of what we're trying to avoid. We're trying to allow moisture through every part of that starch granule. By allowing the moisture to be able to pass through the entire kernel, you're allowing enzymes that are present to break down that long, complex starch into simple sugars. We start that process and then we halt it by kilning. So during the kilning process, we are basically putting those enzymes in suspended animation, and then we are adding flavor. We'll go over the kilning process and how we develop flavor in a little while. But once those enzymes are in suspended animation, they will maintain that way until they are reintroduced with hot water. Basically, they are brought back to life through the mash process in brewing. The mashing is going to wake up those enzymes and they're going to start doing their work. You have alpha amylase and beta amylase enzymes that are affecting the chain, the starch chain, in different ways, either eating it from the ends to shorten it or cutting it right in the middle into smaller pieces. So we start the process and then we halt it and then we let the brewers finish the job. That's kind of the goal of malting. And again, we could not make beer without malting. We are the middle process between the farmer and the brewer. It's an often overlooked part of brewing. All right, follow me. We're going to go inside.